excited to have Dave Malouf here. He is the head of strategy and operations at Northwestern Mutual. I'm super fortunate to work with him. He's a design leader, an educator, and he's worked at companies like HP, Rackspace, and Motorola. And he's also, like I said, an educator. So worked or taught at Savannah College of Art and Design and General Assembly. You know him as being an active member of the UX community, being a founding member of the IXDA and previous co-chair of Enterprise UX. And he's authored a lot of articles and books as well that many of you have written or read, specifically the DesignOps Handbook, Guide to UX Leadership, and overall just a really well-known expert and speaker around design ops. And that is going to be the core of our conversation this evening. Welcome, Dave.
Hi.
Awesome. So glad you could be with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. So I thought we would start the evening off with some of the basics. So let's define what is design ops.
I define design ops pretty broadly. I think of design ops as everything responsible for allowing designers to do their job and focus on their job, which is designing, right? And Meredith Black put it really well: if a designer is not designing, they're doing design operations. So if you're, reading email, that's operations. If you're doing timesheets, if you're doing any kind of project management, if you're doing, meeting comms or things like that, that's all operations because you're not spending that time designing. And so that's one sort of big thing about it. I guess the other one is it focuses on the practice management. So there's an entire practice that needs to be built around the action of designing and researching and so forth. And so it's about managing the people and managing the business and doing all of those aspects. So helping teams create career ladders, helping teams create the recruiting process and interviewing and how to evaluate each other and creating development plans and so forth on the people side, onboarding people, and on the business side, vendor relationships, software licensing management, stuff like that. So
all the fun stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when we use the term design ops, like where did that come from, that term?
Well, there's two terms, like there's design operations, and where did that come from? And it has a history and age of its own. And then there's like the Web 2.0ification of it into design ops, and that has its own sort of thing. Design operations has a rather varied history depending on how far back you go, what community you're a part of. So when I first started thinking about design operations, I actually checked to see like, where did this come from? And I started doing searches on job boards for the phrase design operations. And it turns out that the phrase was used by a lot of traditional design orgs, non-digital design organizations, to be what we focus on now as, or in digital side, we tend to think of as program management, or the other way is studio management. So that was one way it was done. And then I started to see traditional design organizations calling it design operations, and then agencies and media calling it creative operations. Design ops came about as a recognition within the digital community that there's this thing happening called DevOps. We don't know what it is. It's happening amongst developers. It has nothing to do with us. And for myself, I was at Rackspace at the time when I was thinking about this, and we were actively engaged in designing tools for DevOps. We had DevOps services and whatever. And so my brain was sort of ticking through all this stuff, and I was like, wow, wouldn't it be neat if we like took that same level of intentionality around operations for developers, and platforming and all this other stuff that goes on there, and could we be thinking about that for design? And yeah, you know, it's just really natural given my context to call it design ops. Later, I kind of like really pulled that back and said, this has nothing to do with DevOps. This is like not about the chain of code, and because people started going in that direction, and I pulled it back, and some people started calling it DesOps instead of design ops, and like that was the line I was not willing to cross. I was just like, no, like design ops is cool. We're not going the DesOps route. So yeah.
Nice. You're taking me back with the Web 2.0 reference. I haven't heard that one in a long time.
Yeah, we you know, maybe we take the G out of design ops, so you know, something like that.
We got to take all the vowels out. Well, I think you know, design ops, you know, overall in our field is still somewhat relatively new. So what, you know, you kind of touched on it a little bit there, but like what was really sort of shifting that enabled the emergence of this to become like a core part of design practice?
I think what shifted was scale, that you found that there were organizations out there that were in the hundreds of designers. And I think, you know, when agencies were getting that big, it didn't really matter so much because projects were so insular from each other, and they didn't have to connect the dots nearly as much. But once we got that same size inside of companies, it really became about, well, how do we create a single design culture? How do we, you know, engage across the scale of space and time to do that? And I think that was probably like one of the larger drivers, was really how do we scale everything? Then it sort of became a question of, well, if we're going to scale, well, we need to do this efficiently, and we need to optimize, and sort of got like tied into all of those like businessy things so that we could sell it. But in the end, for me, it's about amplifying value, right? And yeah, we can scale, but it's about scaling the value, right? Like it's not about scaling optimization. It's more about value creation, and how can we do things differently so we're getting more value from our organizations. And that's not more value per designer, right? In that kind of like, how can we get more juice out of the fruit? But how can we be making sure that we're getting the value that we could be getting from design, even if we kept the same amount of people and the same amount of scope, there still is more value to be getting from that. And that's where my focus has tried to be.
Awesome. So I feel like you might have touched a little bit on this one, but you know, some of these things you mentioned, like it's all the things when you're not designing is design ops. So what does like a typical day look like for someone who is working on a design ops team?
So I would say that it depends on what kind of design ops team you are. Like there is no one kind of design operator. Some design teams either formed a certain way, or have certain culture, or have certain scale that allows for more segmentation. And then some that they're doing everything, right? At Northwestern Mutual, we've been able to really focus on one area of design ops more than others. And so we've built an entire team around design program management, which I would call like the delivery operations piece of it. So they're really focused on how do we help our design teams move through delivery. It's a focus area. It's a gravitational area of focus. What anyone does when they start from a focus area is they then learn that, oh, I need these other pieces of operations in order to do that focus. So in our case, a lot of our day-to-day, a lot of meetings. And B is a lot of cat herding, right? You're trying to get people to do things, to communicate, to align their communications. And then I think the third thing worth mentioning is there's a lot of recording, monitoring, and tracking of different kinds of data, some of which is just the standard project management data. But as you move more in maturity, you're going to start tracking kind of the metrics of the work that you're doing. Some of those metrics are related to the user needs and the design value and things like that. And some of those metrics are going to be related to the operational metrics, to make sure that you're doing the work in an appropriate way.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think being able to amplify the value that the design team is bringing, and to be able to, continue to get as much goodness as you can is really, really important. I'm curious, when you think about a design leader, or maybe even a design org, when should they be considering, oh, now is the time to add design operations? Like, what are those key things that they should be looking out for?
So first of all, you have design operations, whether you have a person responsible for it or not, right? It's one of those things, like, you have an experience whether you designed it or not, right? So, it's that thing. I think when it comes down to segmenting it into set kinds of activities or set practice before you even hire people, right? You're going to think about, well, we need to be thinking about these types of things. So if you're a design team of one, you don't really think about it. You just do your job and kind of thing. But I have seen design teams of 4 or 5 start processing this stuff, and they figure out within their scale, the limitations of that scale and budgets and whatnot and time and availability, to start giving attention to things that give them more value, more credence. They'll start working with HR on career path, because now all of a sudden there's a manager. How do I become a manager? There'll be things about figuring out the working relationships between the different stakeholders, design, product management, business, whatnot. So if you're doing research, that would be another area. So to give kind of like a story around this, when I was at DigitalOcean, I came there, we had 3 designers. We tripled that within 6 months easily, right? So it's not a lot of people, but it's a lot of growth, right? One of the things that we were figuring out was, how do we scale research? We didn't even have a research team. So how do we scale research? And there were some things that one person was just saying, I'm interested in this, I'm interested in this. And I was like, well, great, I'll cover your time, right? So that you can start building these elements. And she started building an insight database and a recruitment database and things like that, and started allowing the whole design team and the product organization actually to start gaining value because of the way we've been able to scale in that way without ever having a design operator dedicated. And we were doing other things like that. Someone else jumped into the career path stuff, another person jumped in, and we started building our design system and things like that, right? So you can sort of do things organically. There does come a certain point where the stress points start to show themselves, and they can be different for every organization. What are those stress points? Could be different. Are you all of a sudden seeing attrition? Are you all of a sudden hearing from your partners there's problems, that they're not able to get what they expect to get from your design organization? And as you hear more and more of these things and you dig in deeper, a good design leader will come up and say, hey, we need to do something about this, right? There's things there that we need to now think about. And that may mean bringing on a whole person. It may mean splitting up a design manager's time so they take on those operational aspects.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think it is. There's so much that's situational about the org and the people, and how you carve that out. I think one of the things that a lot of folks are often struggling with is they have to potentially make a case for funding, and whether that's a case for a designer or a somebody to lead design ops or to lead research. Is there anything special that helps someone make a case for design operations in an org?
Certain things lend themselves better to other kinds of things. So I would say, using my more recent examples, I think at Northwestern Mutual, I didn't have to make the case for my job. Someone else did that. So I don't know how that went. I'll just say thank you, right? But I would say that we had to make the case for how to build out and invest in the design system, which is a core operational element. And we just put the numbers out there. So we did have a design system, but it wasn't scaling as well as we would have liked. And so we had to make the case to invest in it. And what we did is we showed the baseline of what we were at, and we showed these teams have shown this level of change in positive directions, whether that's cost saving, time saving, whatever. And we said, wow, that's equal to this amount of money. Imagine if we invested some small percentage of that amount of money, and then we can make that savings across a much larger swath of the organization. That became really easy, but we had to find the metrics in order to do that, right? The other example is the research coordinator. And we just found an opportunity sort of taking advantage of parental leave. And instead of replacing a researcher for a researcher, we replaced a researcher for a research ops coordinator. And it allowed us to sort of then show what was going on and create the stories. And it wasn't necessarily metrics driven, it's been more story driven, but we have the case, we know it's what we want to do, and now we have approval for the role moving forward. So those are some of the easier cases. I think when you get more into the people ops side of things, it gets a little fuzzier. Sometimes you're also competing with other interests in the organization around that. Program management is difficult if you have a very mature organization that has program management in other areas. So why do we need program management in design? So that becomes even a harder case. Or you have an easy case because program management is always can be segmented throughout that organization. So shouldn't we have it too? So then you can make the case that way. So yeah, it all depends, but it's never easy because it is a cost center. So proving that cost is returning value is really the challenge.
I think it's such a good reminder too of, proving the value. Metrics are great, but, case studies and stories and wins within an organization can really help, along with those core metrics that you can get.
I love, whenever I present stuff, the baseline stuff for design system, for example, it's one thing to have the metrics and you can put it in funny charts and whatnot. What's really great is that quote from just the right VP or just the right senior director, right? And that influencer person. And if you just get that right quote from that person, it's yeah, people aren't even going to look at the numbers anymore. They're just sold on that quote.
Absolutely. Put in some good storytelling in there.
Yeah.
So let's say, in our hypothetical scenario that we've kind of been walking through, we've got somebody who's, made the case for design ops at their org, and, they've got their funding and they're now going out and looking for that person. So what are some of those core qualities that make somebody really excel at design ops?
I'm gonna not answer directly. I'm gonna say well, I'll hopefully get to the direct answer. I'm gonna start indirectly. I think that there's two paths that I've seen for design operators to come out of. These aren't the only paths. These are just the worn paths, the cow paths, right? The first one are people who are project or program managers at design agencies. right? They've been working in a design environment, they've been doing project work, because that's required in agencies to get things done. And they have that delivery side down pat. Some of those people have taken their work to what I would call like the next level, in sort of like a Maslow's chart, if you will, and taking program management to studio management. And those are the people who are probably going to be the most successful senior level design operators in an internal organization, in a corporation side, inside. The other path are people like myself, and there's been many people who have just people who grew up as designers over the years, got into leadership roles, and when they became leaders, or became on that cusp of leadership, what they really found out was, I'm actually really attracted to the operational side of leadership, or the practice management side of leadership. I'm not so into the other strategy and team management kind of pieces as I am just thinking about as that operator. And if I was to do it all over again, I probably should have been a COO, right? Like that probably should have been my path at some point, but that wasn't me, right? And I love design, and I'm all about valuing design, and that's sort of my key path for now. What's really interesting is what I've noticed from those people is and this is also part of my path, and I've seen others do that, is they even move away from design ops more into chief of staff roles and turn that into the generalized, not just design specific thing, right? I've seen a few of my peers do that. So those two paths are the ones that I've seen. Designers who just like, whoa, this operations thing is everything I wanted to do my entire life. I just didn't know it existed. And the other one is I've been a program manager in design contexts. Those are the two most worn paths.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a couple of things in there. One, I think it's really helpful for our audience to sort of hear how folks' careers may have shifted and changed. I know that we tend to get a lot of folks in that maybe are considering a career change, and how you might be able to move through different disciplines within design, or even I call them design adjacent roles. You mentioned chief of staff, and I don't want to veer too far away from some of the stuff that we're talking about, but I'm wondering for folks who are like, chief of staff, what is that? And how is it different than somebody working in design ops? Do you want to spend a little bit
Are we
of time
too old
on
to talk about the West Wing, or like, let's not use the example from House of Cards, that's for sure, right? It's definitely not the example we want to use, but there's many different definitions of chief of staff, just like there's many different definitions of designer, right? Like, one that seems to resonate for me is that person who is not an administrative assistant to an executive, but is a partner to that executive, is the person who says, I'm going to do everything to make sure that that executive is successful. So where an administrator might organize that executive's life for them, the chief of staff is going to go further than that. They're going to figure out and work with that executive around what are the things you need to do to be successful. Let's split this up, right? And a design operator, to sort of like give it, a little difference here, thinks more about the design organization as a whole. The chief of staff really focuses on how is this organization for the benefit of that executive. And it's a really different mindset. So for example, one of the things that I think about on a regular basis is how much time am I adding to my executive's life, right? If I can add an entire day a week to my executive, that's my goal. I'm nowhere near that yet, as you've seen, Jody. But that's sort of the goal that David, my VP, and I have spoken about, where if I can get 8 hours extra a week of your time that you can apply elsewhere, that's great. And how do I do that? Right? It takes a lot to do that. It means I need to be in there at every step of the way with what they're working on. It means that I need to have a trusting relationship with that person to know what are the decisions that I can make versus what are the decisions that I need to give that person. What are the things that I can move away from that person, what are the, and take on versus what are the things that they need to read, right? And to manage themselves. So it's interesting. Like I've seen peers of mine who have straight up chief of staff roles take on more of those administrative responsibilities because it gives them access like to the calendar, literally. So like every invite goes through the chief of staff, for example, and the chief of staff basically is the Tetris maker for that executive at that level, right? Which is thought of as like administrative, but the chief of staff takes much more of a strategic lens into it.
Well, I think you just touched on a lot of things that, you know, can really drive this person and the organization and their leader to be extremely successful. But I guess, what are maybe some of the things that somebody stepping into a new design ops role, like what's an immediate win, or things that they should be thinking about as they walk in?
I think the first immediate win is to be a listener, right? Like don't jump in and start doing stuff. Your first win is going to be that therapist to everybody, you know, and just listen and get the lay of the land, if nothing else, right? First, you're trying to build trust, but then you're also using that as an opportunity. You know, you're not a pure therapist, you're being opportunistic in the therapy, right? So, you know, the other thing that it's a win is if your understanding of the lay of the land can be socialized amongst the key influencers within the group of people who you need to be influencing. And so it means like you're co-developing that lay of the land in some kind of way. And so like one of the things that I've done in other organizations when I first came in was doing that laying of the land work. Like what is the topology of the design organization or the product organization? So when I was a consultant, that was really a lot of what I did at first is I would go in and I would do the mapping work. And it really turned out to be a service design practice. So I would basically be service designing the design practice, doing ecology maps, blueprints, and things like that, so that we had an understanding through all of the design leadership and beyond of this is the state of where we are, and then doing it again for where we want to go, right? And then you connect the dots along the way.
Nice. Build out that map of all of the work in front of you.
Yeah.
Nice. I guess sort of flipping that a little bit, you know, what are those potential challenges of somebody coming in or pitfalls that folks may run into as they start to set up design ops?
I'd say the pitfalls, I can talk about the, you know, being a consultant and being internal are really different. And I think like when you're internal, you come in and people are going to start grabbing at you to do things. They're just going to say, oh, we need this, we need this, we need this. And they have all these things that they want to do without any kind of strategic awareness. It's just all responsive, right? It's all urgent. You were brought in for a reason. And the reason is there was a lot of pain. So everyone just wants you to do the physical therapy, basically, of the different, you know, reference pain sources without actually taking on the disease. They just want you to take on the symptoms. And that's the challenge, is how do you you know, avert the reactionaryism in an organization. That's probably the biggest challenge. Second biggest challenge is just relationships. Relationships are tough, really tough, and they can just go sideways on you. And the bigger a corporation is, the more quickly things can just go sideways things happen, things change all around you that you can't predict. And so you just have to be able to roll with things and rebuild relationships quickly. And but yeah.
Yeah. I think there, you mentioned it, there is so much relationship building and connecting that sort of happens. And I know you use the term therapist as well for the organization. And I've definitely seen that as well. And I have been there, and I had a wonderful operations leader that I worked with previously, not Dave, who really filled that role in a difficult time for the team of being that sounding board. And I give him credit. He would always say, do you need to vent, or do you want me to help you solve a problem? Which was a really good way to sort of just frame the conversation going in. Well, I think I kind of want to close it out with one last question, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. But so much in our industry is just always changing. I like to joke that my first job title was multimedia designer. What is that anymore? And so as you think about design operations, like, what do you think the future holds for it?
It's the new hotness in a lot of ways, which is a dangerous place to be. Sometimes I feel like it has the air of a bubble to it, like everyone needs this now kind of thing. And it's something that it has two things. One is it's too easy to just say it's program management and throw it into a program management office at the enterprise level, and they genericize it and it's not design specific anymore. And so that's like one pop of the bubble. The other pop of the bubble is that it's a cost center, and it just becomes too difficult for people to maintain. And that one I'm growingly less worried about coming off of the pandemic, because operations has shown itself to be really useful during this time. That wrangled a lot, changed on a dime certain things in certain companies. Like, it was just really a gift for certain companies that did have it. And for other companies, they saw those companies and were like, oh my God, like if we had that, we would have been, so much better off. So that one I'm less worried about. I do think there still is a lot of churn in the meaning of design operations, which is probably like the third pop that I would put out there. Like, design operations is a design system. Design operations is delivery. Design operations, like, they're people trying to like create these narrow focuses, or they're just trying to create like pop frameworks around it that they can just package, and consulting companies can create training and stuff like that. On the positive side, I think, it's really been growing rapidly. Organizations like the DesignOps Assembly has grown. The community that's part of the Rosenfeld Media communities that they've set up based off their conferences has grown. There's an international conference out of Manchester that's been building up its own momentum. So I do see growth happening, but I still don't know. I don't have a prediction of what it all looks like in 5 years. It still is very liquid, very fluid. I personally haven't felt like I've gone through enough to say, this is what I would want a design ops practice to be. Maybe folks who are in much larger organizations who have gone through a lot more might have a better sense of that. I haven't heard them tell that story in a way that I feel like they have. For me, like, their stories work for them, but I haven't felt like they've told a story that I feel like could be generalized beyond that Google or IBM only example, so to speak. So I'm still waiting for that.
Oh, we'll see what the future holds too. None of us have a crystal ball, or else, I don't know, we'd all be millionaires or something at this point.
Yep.
Awesome. I want to open it up to the audience if folks have any questions. I think we've got a smaller group, so if folks just want to unmute, I think that's totally fine.
Yeah, let's have at it.
Yeah, I was thinking about just giving space for the name design operations in and of itself has brought some focus to, you know, what otherwise I think was just no man's land, or some like a bunch of design activities that nobody really had agency for at like a leadership level. So like that's a massive plus in my mind. But just in terms of like what the future holds, or like will it always be a cost center, or can you see it's like the business case, if you have the right metrics, you're standing up the right infrastructures to prove, you know, efficiencies and quality improvements, and against whatever your OKRs are.
Yeah.
Do you see that kind of a future?
I do. I mean, you know, I used to work for organizations that had so much, which was just like service, and service was like a cost center. Like call centers are just a cost center, right? And the old way of thinking about them was must reduce time, must reduce this, must reduce, and you know, squeezing oranges was it. More and more cost centers are now using phrases like being consultative, right? It's nothing new, but like, how can, you know, can we upsell? Can we, you know, find moments of brand connection? Can, you know, what are the ways where cost centers can be, you know, creating that more value? I think that, you know, my personal framing around amplifying value is definitely geared in that way, right? I think that we need to be better about instrumenting our design organizations. Designers need to be open to being instrumented. That sounded horrible, right? But that's the truth. And like what I have seen from too many designers is a reluctance to be measured, right? And I think that reluctance is doing a disservice. That resistance is doing them a disservice. You know, the dreaded timesheet and being monitored and surveillance culture and stuff like that can totally be abused, and has been, and that's why the resistance is there. But that same data source can also lead to being influential and making the case for more, and not just more designers, but more time for design, and better quality, leading to better quality. So I think in the past, the way that those instrumentations have been done, it's been done by outside design, and thus from a non-trustworthy source. I would hope that from a design operations perspective, from someone who is a designer, a fellow designer, right, that we could build that trust back so that these types of instruments can be used in service of the designer instead of, you know, in service of the abuses.
I totally get it.
Great insight, Dave. I got a question for you. So this is awesome. Thank you for sharing your insights and thoughts. It's great to hear. What's your advice to, let's say, a growing department that's looking to bring on their first director of design ops? And what would your advice be for that department? whether it be the head that's making the hire or for the design leadership that is looking to partner with this design ops person, what are some of the key traits or qualities that you would be looking for that's in a, a fast growing sort of product design department that's looking to scale and grow pretty quickly?
Where are they going to put design ops would be one question that I have. Who is it reporting to, right? Would be important.
Yep. In this case, would be the VP of product design.
Yeah. So I would expect the VP of product or the VP or the top designer in the organization. And sometimes it's not the VP of product design because there's also a VP of marketing design or brand design, whatever. But that would be my hope. It's like some head of design. The other thing that I would look for, honestly, is if that leader has experience with operations in some way. Either they've come from a previous organization that had some kind of operations, even if it was just program management and they worked with program managers, something like that. Or they had really strong partnerships with their business partners and were able to tell that story. And I would ask them what those stories are, right? That's like probably the first thing. And I think really what I'd be getting to is, do they have enough wherewithal and understanding of what it means to set this role up for success? You can wish all day long for a design ops thing to just be successful, but when you're creating any new role, you have to work really hard on setting it up for success. And too often people set up new roles really full of hope, but without a lot of intentionality. And then they put that on the person, and then it becomes like frying pan to fire really quick for that person. So really, like, if I was interviewing someone to take on that challenge, I would hire the person who asked for more interviews, because that person is taking the time to set themselves up for success. So in my case, I think I had 3 separate interviews with my current boss, like right now, not just the one that he would normally have, right? I went back like 2 more times and sat down with him and kind of thing, and that, I don't know if that was what made the difference for him, but definitely made a difference for me. So, yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Dave.
I think Alex is looking for a director of design ops, right?
Actually, I've got another question here, folks. So feel free to jump in anytime and interrupt me too. So I got a question for you. So in the role of the design ops program, in that sort of role, is there like a ratio, right? There's always kind of talked about ratio from a product manager, the amount of designers or the amount of engineers ratio to designers in an organization that's, at scale at some point.
Sure.
Do you see that? Is there a number is there a ratio that you kind of look at?
Design ops to designers or design ops to design team?
Design ops to design team or design ops to designers?
I used to talk about ratios a lot, of designers to engineers or designers to product managers. And then Lisa Rattel, who leads research at Atlassian, just shot me in the head with a great thing, which is just like, boom, it's just all about context, right? That said, I'll throw a number up. I aim for 1 to 10. I live with 1 to 20. If I can get to 1 to 15, I'm really happy. So my agreement with my current boss is 1 to 10. We're nowhere near it. So I'm working.
There you go.
At it.
Dave, thank you so much. This is fabulous. I probably missed 10 minutes of the talk earlier, so I apologize if that question was answered, but all your insight has been really helpful. Quick question that I always get asked, and not sure if there is a specific way to answer that question. What's the difference between design ops and research ops?
focus. So it could be nothing, right? Like you could just say there's no difference, right? I could easily say that. Research is a different thing. It has certain needs that are different from the act of designing, right? If you want to think of them as two adjoining practices to each other, even if the same person is doing both practices, right? So forget about like who's doing the work, but it's two different work things. There are different tools, different needs, and so that shifts what you need operationally to do it. If you do have two different organizations, like you actually have a research team and 4 to 5 researchers, and you have another team of 20 designers, whatever, I may want to have someone on my design ops team or someone on my ops team who is geared towards those special needs of research. So a couple of things that I definitely find researchers need is help with recruitment of subjects, research subjects. They, scheduling, incentive management, recruiting, just sourcing, all of that.
Panel, yeah.
And the second thing is the documentation management and the means by which to run that, right? The overlap is it's project-based and you need to have project management, right? So the delivery side is an overlap. The other overlap is people ops. They might have different artifacts for those people ops because they have a different ladder or a different skills map for that ladder, but it still is people ops, right?
Yep, makes sense. Thank you. I mean, although I see as the two work together, you need to do design and research within the product development cycle. You may have a little bit of an overlap there, but to your point, if the two organizations are a little bit separate, but not necessarily under the same umbrella, you may need.
There are organizations that call their operations UX ops instead of design ops because then they create an umbrella and they have content ops and design ops and research ops under that umbrella. Right?
That's true. Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
I think maybe we have time for one more question, if anybody has one. All right. Well, I want to give a big thank you. We tend to do this at Northwestern Mutual to Dave. This is
Jazz hands.
ASL clapping or jazz hands. But thank you for joining and sharing all of your wealth of information with us tonight. As everybody knows, this is being recorded and we'll have it up on YouTube in a week or so. We'll get any job postings that were put in the chat. We'll get those posted up on the meetup page. Again, if anybody here is interested in talking, whether you want to do a formal talk, a panel, a workshop, we're happy to have you. You can reach out to myself or Alex or Jim. And we will also be getting that June event up as well, being part of 24 hours of UX. So it's going to be a great event as well. But thank you all for joining us again. And thank you to Dave. All right, everybody. Have a good evening. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.